and welcome to the panel, Priorities and New Challenges of EU Memory Policies. It is our pleasure to have the three experts in the table precisely when we are addressing this topic memory in times of uncertainty. In times when democracy and social cohesion are increasingly tested, the way Europe remembers its past and learns from it as well has become more crucial than ever. If we learn from the moments in history when democracy was endangered or even abolished, and from the struggles to regain freedom and civil rights, we may find today inspiring examples to guide us in defending what we call our democratic values. Memory policies are not only about commemorating history, you know this. They are also about shaping the present and, hopefully, safeguarding our democratic future. Today, as I said, we are fortunate to have with us three experts who bring diverse institutional and academic perspective on this topic. We will start with Zuzana Dorazilová. She will help us understand, I presume, how memory work intersects with current EU efforts to combat racism and discrimination. Zuzana is the Deputy Head of Unit Non-Discrimination, Anti-Racism and Roma Coordination at the DG Justice in the European Commission. Then we will have Srd Kisevic, who will reflect on the role of the EU programs in promoting remembrance and civic engagement. Srd is, where are you, Srd?
I'm here.
Deputy Head of Unit at the Citizens and EU Values at the agency EACEA. And then Uladzislau Belavusau, our dearest friend and renowned scholar, who will focus on how the EU legal order and developments in the member states, as well as the Russo-Ukrainian war, have been securitizing European memory politics. Ulad is a senior researcher in the European law at the T.M.C. Institute in The Hague, and it's a member of the University of Amsterdam. So, thank you to the three of you, and Zuzana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and hello again. I will elaborate briefly on the challenges that we see in the European Commission, and also elaborate a bit on the priorities how we for the European memory and remembrance activities. So first of all, the current challenges are marked by the current geopolitical context in Europe. We see wars, we see the Russian aggression in Ukraine, we see, of course, very serious conflict in Israel. We see deterioration of diversity and equality policies in the United States. So this all has a huge impact then back on Europe, where we see also a lot of information manipulation, foreign information manipulation, which is done on purpose. There are a lot of funds invested and coming into disinformation, and this whole process fuels basically fuels polarization in Europe, manipulates the elections, and impacts on our democracies. And it has a huge impact also on equality policies, on non-discrimination policies. And we see, when we do studies, surveys, we see the situation is actually getting worse. Despite we have quite solid anti-discrimination legislation, we have a Charter of Fundamental Rights, a lot of activities, lots of funds are invested. This situation is in some areas getting seriously worse. For example, when we were surveying the situation of LGBTIQ people recently, there was 19% increase in perception and in real experience of hate crime and hate speech, and basically safety of LGBTIQ people. So This doesn't appear just like that. Yeah, there has to be some reason. So, and then we can explore with the help of experts, with the help of academia and civil society organizations, what are actually the sources of this. Of these dangers, of this deterioration, and we see that there is a lot of energy is actually put into sending fake news, fueling disinformation, and changing the views of Europeans. So we see a huge rise in race, basically in racism, violence against women, and also in anti-gypsyism. But of course, the rise in anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred is also documented, and it is quite obvious that the conflict in Gaza and Israel is the main source. So all this context is really critical to understand the importance of remembrance, of the memory, of the knowledge of the past, of the knowledge of the origins and consequences of authoritarian regimes, totalitarian regimes, where many of us lived for an important part of our lives. To understand that and learn, pass the experience to younger generations. We have had today great presentations by the academics, so I won't go into detail on that, but one message was really clear, that we have to pass the information to all generations, not only to young, but we have to, of course, to focus on young people. But all segments of the populations are the voters that can then decide on where our democracy shifts, and the history has the history teaching has an important role. This is what we also heard today. It is at that time when we are equipped by skills such as media literacy skills, critical thinking skills, and this has to be nurtured from the very beginning, but throughout the lives of people. So we have to use all the tools to basically equip the people with those skills. And to be able to better recognize the signs when the situation is slightly changing towards a different, and we may not see that we are going to on the wrong path. And this is happening also already now in Europe. In many member states, we have a lot of radical parties that repeat unacceptable narratives, and we need to step up and contradict with knowledge, with real facts, and with real data. So this all costs money. So we need to invest in research. We need to invest in training the journalists, equipping basically all segments of society with kind of defensive means. Also supporting civil society organizations, because they are on the forefront of a lot of efforts that are being done in the area of the area of the memory and remembrance activities. So this is why the European Commission is since decades, many years, running and cherishing the programs. It used to be this Europe for Citizens program that is now the SERF program, and where a lot of the activities have been funded, a lot of civil society organizations have been supported, networks have been created, and this will remain a priority in the also in the next term. Some of you may have heard that now there are discussions on the next multi-annual financial framework that always sets legislation important for financial programs for the next 7 years. So the SURF program will be replaced by Agora EU program. This program is kind of a merge of previous programs in the area of education, culture, and equality, citizenship, and fundamental rights. And for the strand that will deal with basically the remembrance activities with memory, there we will have the Commission has proposed a double budget because we are aware there is a need. This is one of the ways. It's not the only way, but it's an important tool to basically support activities on the ground. So we will see how the negotiations in the Council will go, because now the proposals of the Commission will be debated and very much adapted by the Council and by the European Parliament. But the essence is here, the feeling that projects in the area of memory are important, and it is important for basically the idea is to build more cohesive Europe and equip the citizens with the tools they need. We have to learn. We have to ensure that we can learn about common history, cultural heritage, and actually learn how to appreciate the diversity and achievements. We have had so many years without wars, thanks to the European integration, and this is something that should be also stressed, and we see that it is an important factor of stability also in the enlargement negotiations. So yes, understanding past struggles for freedoms and democracy can help the citizens to respond to the challenges with greater awareness and resilience, and to help them defend fundamental rights and the rights of minorities, because we know that the minorities are always the first who suffer. They are the first who are marginalized and taken as a scapegoats. We have seen that in the period of Holocaust, that the Jews were, of course, the typical victims. But already years before, persons with disabilities were sterilized and killed by the regime, still before the establishment of the concentration camps. So we have to be vigilant and to intervene exactly in the moment when in the moment of peace, when we think that we have solid democratic regimes, because even in our regimes things are happening. Maybe you have also noticed discussions on these were legal sterilization of Roma women in some of the countries like Czech Republic, Slovakia, where there were laws, there were even legal measures provided, so the doctors did not do anything illegal. But of course now it's absolutely unacceptable, and recognition of those human rights violations, and in some cases also the compensation is really something very important, that can help the society to accept those traumas. Or similar, the forced contraceptive measures in Greenland are now discussed very much in media, where the Danish Prime Minister has apologized for the situation that was done, and that basically went to the decline of the ethnic Greenlanders. So this we have to know the history to be able to react to those everyday facts that are happening around, and we also have to understand the negative history, and we have to be able to reconcile divergent and alternative regional narratives. Because the impact, and we have to also admit and realize that the impact of totalitarian regimes and authoritarian regimes has a long lasting, that the victims who suffered past their traumas over the generations. So this is also something that has to be recognized and somehow worked with, because otherwise the society will be weak, because we will still be living with those traumas. Yeah, so that's. Concerning the new EU priorities, they take basically all this experience, all this knowledge that is also coming a lot from you, from different academic resources, from NGOs, and when we decide on our priorities, we try to reflect on them. So my hope today is also to collect also some new incentives, new ideas, or challenges that you are facing, because it's very important that policymakers in Brussels collect this and reflect it in the preparation of the work programs for the financial regulations, in all the legislation. It is very important. So on the new priorities, I can divide them into segments. One is the classic one that has been under those memory programs for years, such as recognition and memory of authoritarian, totalitarian regimes. Here we have heard very interesting discussion on the East versus West, which is very much visible in Brussels. We have had a lot of discussions how to grasp this, because of course we are EU based on 27 states with different experience, and people do not feel very much for the others unless they really want to. So it is really an effort. And a lot has been achieved, I think, since the beginning, even at that time new member states, countries from the East were joining, that they passed this kind of feeling for their situation. And again, those countries grasped the feeling for the situation that was, of course, happening in the south of Europe, such as Spain or Greece. So the memory of Holocaust against Jewish people is also very much on the table. It will stay, because of course the data is clear that there is a huge rise in anti-Semitic incidents. We see the attacks on synagogues, on children. It is of course unacceptable. We know that now it's being fueled by the situation in Israel even more, and we have to resist and say clearly that of course the Jewish population in Europe should not be persecuted for the acts of Israeli government. So those let's say classical priorities will continue. We need more continuous research, more new creative projects, how to pass the knowledge to young generations. We had some discussion. It would be really important to really continue and be creative. There are ideas and that is very much on the table. Digitalize the historical materials, because the survivors are, of course, there are not so many survivors left, and we would need to use a lot of audiovisual materials and digitalize their stories, because this is what actually works, passing the emotion from real stories, showing the stories of victims, but also stories of bystanders and perpetrators, because to show that the society was never black and white, and there were a lot of reasons why people didn't act at that particular moment, and it is important to show this, because we are in this situation now when we may not act, when we should act maybe more. So it is something to learn from the perspective of even bystanders. And so, for instance, how to bring more young people into this discussion. One of our recent calls for proposals encouraged developing networks of young ambassadors to promote Shoah remembrance. So there are funds invested into bringing really young people with their new experience, new look at the current society, new worries, new personal experience, and to somehow translate this into new activities and new outcomes, and hopefully reaching some strong impact. And the second, so that was like one category of priorities. But the second category that was not that has not been on the table for a long time is looking at the periods of colonialization, history of migration, and also looking at non-Jewish victims of Holocaust, which are very much forgotten victims, such as I mentioned, persons with disabilities, but also LGBTIQ people or Roma. Concerning the, for instance, the LGBTIQ community, it is not a very known fact that to wider public that many, in particular, gay and bisexual men were sent to the concentration camps and perished, and those who survived those, their experience was never recognized or acknowledged on a really high level as for the other parts of victims. So yesterday the European Commission published the second strategy on LGBTIQ equality. It is a communication setting up a policy framework, announcing legal measures, announcing financial measures, and announcing policy measures. And it was basically for the first time when the memory of victims of LGBTIQ victims of the Holocaust is mentioned in such a document, and there is a strong message that this will be one of the priorities, that during our commemorations we have to think about those victims, and we have to find ways how to commemorate also them. Second, another forgotten group of victims are Roma. You in Spain have, I think this year is a year of Roma, so I don't know if you had a chance to participate in some of the events and if Roma Holocaust was mentioned. But it is Roma were the second largest ethnic community who perished in the Holocaust, and it was and there the hate against Roma was even stronger against or sometimes, it's described by the historians and by the survivors that the majority population didn't have a lot of sympathy for Roma. For Roma in their villages, and when they started to collect them for the transports, everybody was helping to bring them. So it was really a very sad story, and this forgotten Holocaust was basically recognized only in the 1980s. So since then, it was for the first time when discussions were debate started on this topic, and in the Czech Republic, for instance, one of the internation camps called Lety, there was a pig farm until 2 years ago, where finally there is a nice monument marking this sad history of Czech Roma, who were basically almost all killed in the Holocaust. Only few survived. So basically, the Roma community in the Czech Republic is now where those who were forcibly migrated from Slovakia. So this is a very sad memory, and because nobody knows about, I don't want to say generalize nobody, but the knowledge is so limited. Also, Roma don't know very much about their own history, because Roma history is not taught. It is a very under-researched piece of part. So this would hopefully be a priority on the table for a long time, because we need more research, more data, and more stories collected of those victims, and also of acts of resistance, because this is how you pass very strong emotional messages to the next generations, and this would help to. We hope that this would help to somehow change the current positions in the society, because when we do surveys on the perception of who is the most discriminated, Roma are usually are the best. Even they always win over the Jewish population. So it is there is a hidden anti-gypsyism in the society all over the Europe, and this is basically it's a special part of racism against Roma that needs to be tackled, and it will be tackled very much also by recognizing the history that we have had centuries of persecution of Roma who were also enslaved and excommunicated from the church. So so this is how the current memory priorities are being discussed, defined. When you see the calls for proposals under our SERF program, so we call for activities. And also we would love to have more research and more experts, more debate. And the very last point I wanted to stress is the memory of colonialism and how basically and this we also heard already earlier today, how the whole history of Europe that was marked by those discoveries and imperialistic efforts of many countries brought how the memory of those times where a lot of human rights violations happened is still fueling the racism in today's societies, and there is a lot of structural racism in our societies that we, again, the only way how to counteract is to acknowledge, to discuss, to try to strengthen the society by bringing the facts on all sides, and to show that we cannot continue, we cannot have a strong society if we do not acknowledge those wrongdoings that were done to some parts, and they are still marginalized and victims of discrimination. So we will publish first anti-racism strategy in December this year. The work is underway, and memory policies will be also reflected in the strategy, outlining some possible ideas of for financial priorities for financial programs, for joint projects in with other international organizations, because there a lot of work has been done by United Nations, by UNESCO, by Council of Europe. So in this way, European Commission wants to continue and somehow use the synergies of because the funds are of course very limited, and we have to help each other and do the joint project. So this is, I think, all from me now, where I thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, I would be happy to reply to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Zuzana, for detailing the EU initiatives or priorities in promoting the knowledge of the past in order to address the present troubles. And please, Srd, the floor is yours.
Thank you and good afternoon. I'm pleased to be here today. I'm Srd Kisevic. I work for EACEA agency, which is Education and Culture Executive Agency. It is the funding arm of the European Commission. So the European Commission does the strategies, the policies, the laws, etc. We fund the projects, among which are also projects in the area of remembrance. I'm also very happy to be here, I have to say, on a personal level as well. I was reflecting a lot about this event coming in. As a person who grew up in the 90s in the Balkans, and I understand I might not be the only one here, I immediately recognized the importance of this topic. I mean, it's very clear to me that this topic is has implications beyond purely academical discussion. It is a topic that can shape a whole culture, whole society, and it can even impact the success of nation, I would say. So I really feel that this is an important topic in this perspective. And to maybe make a link with what Zuzana was mentioning in her opening remarks earlier this morning, when she noticed something I noticed as well. that Europeans have constantly, in large EU surveys, when they were asked what EU means for them most in terms of values, and they were given a wide variety of choice. You know, they could have gone with free market, they could have gone with the movement of people or something like that, and they went for peace. Consistently, over and over again, they chose peace as the number one value for Europe. And it made me think how Americans in their political discourse, sometimes they say, it's the economy stupid when they talk about their elections, so it's the peace stupid when we talk about why we are together in the European Union. Peace is not an actual word-by-word value in the Article 2 of the treaty, which lists all the values of the European Union. But I find it represented, and as well as the topic of remembrance, represented in the very first value that is mentioned there, and it is the value of human dignity. I must say, when I had to in my professional career learn the Article 2 many times, I was always puzzled why human dignity is the number one and not freedom or democracy or equality, all of these other words that for me seem to have a more direct meaning. But I think thanks to this event, I realize why human dignity is the number one value in that Article 2. And this brings me to that issue of safeguarding the EU values, which also means creating the conditions for dialogue around historical memory, so that we can avoid instrumentalizing or having single rigid interpretations of historical memory. So we can discuss these different narratives, but of course have this dialogue in the larger liberal democratic framework. And only through such openness can European remembrance genuinely serve this democratic culture and the society based on fundamental rights. Now, in the Srd program, we have remembrance in two strands of our program. One is called citizens' engagement and participation, and another strand is called union values. And we have two mechanisms through which we support projects. One is action grants, so it's really for, I would say, more practical, smaller projects. And another one is what we call operating grants. First, we find larger organizations, umbrella organizations in Europe, with which we sign partnership agreements, and then we fund their operational costs, which includes also different activities they organize. And we also offer them a re-granting mechanism, which means we don't only fund those organizations, but through them, they can also cascade further down smaller grants to really grassroots level projects and initiatives. I could mention here one of the action grant calls we have, which is the Srd Remembrance, or RAM call, which has 4 priorities. One is democratic transition, so transition into democracy, which, as we know in Europe, for a number of countries, it's a very important memory. We have a priority of Holocaust against Jewish people, and then the priority of other victims of Holocaust, genocide, and war crimes. And then the priority of historical migration and slavery. It's important to say that these priorities, of course, they guide projects on historical commemoration, but beyond that as well, because they touch other public policies. So these projects also, I would argue, enhance social cohesion in the society by engaging youth, educators, migrants, and minorities via dialogue and grassroots actions. They also promote respect for diversity in a society by integrating gender, minority perspectives, and recognizing victim groups like Jews, Roma, Muslims, and LGBTIQ persons. And last but not least, democracy as a whole is strengthened through these projects by connecting historical lessons on authoritarianism, resistance, and transitions to today's protection of rule of law and fundamental rights. These projects, they also build resilience to extremism and misinformation by combating denial and distortion of atrocities, and they promote civic participation and minority inclusion. Now, I'm not saying that these projects that we support are enough on their own, but I will say that they do play an important part. We should try to continuously improve these projects and actions. Innovation and testing new ways should be our priority, because part of our mission is also to be the testing ground for such projects, to see what works in real life, and then to send that information back to the policymakers in the society. And it also made me think of another issue when we talk about engaging young people, that we should not maybe lose hope too soon or think that they're not interested in these topics. When I was a student, I remember I was rather socially and politically active back then, so I would ask my peers, are they political? And most often they would tell me they're not political, they're apolitical, straight immediate response. But then when I would follow up and ask them some questions on political subjects, they all had an opinion. They all had an opinion. So I think similarly here, whether consciously or unconsciously, I think young people have incorporated historical narratives. And it is our role to see how best to reach and engage them. And of course, there are many ways how you can do that. It could be through education, culture, and I think politics plays a part in that as well. But civil society for sure is very important because it provides another venue of doing that in a more personal way of connecting people. So it fills a gap that cannot be met by other ways of reaching out. Speaking back on the program itself, the funding in our program for specific topics of remembrance has grown significantly over the years. So for the REM call that I mentioned earlier, in 2021 it was 4.5 million years, and this is a call we run every year. And this year it was 18 millions, so from 4.5 to 18 millions this year. And we have so far funded over 150 projects under the REM call. Coming to the framework partnerships and those operating grants, we just finished a call this year, that's a new call, where we have 9 selected large-scale umbrella organizations. For 7 of them, it's a continuation of a cooperation from earlier framework partnerships, and 2 are completely new beneficiaries. These partnerships are intended to increase the capacities of the selected partners to contribute actively to the development and implementation of EU policies. For example, as Zuzana was also mentioning, the EU strategy on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life. It's also one of those objectives as well. We are really looking into the ways to continuously simplify the way of applying for our program. We know there are lots of things that need to be filled out. To an extent that's understandable. These are very competitive programs. We have to be able to compare. We have to be able to also evaluate all the aspects, but we're really doing, together with other programs, the very best to simplify this whole procedure and to drive up that success rates among the applicants. And I'm also very pleased that the Commission, as mentioned before, has proposed a new successor program to serve, which will combine different EU programs, but it keeps, I would say, the SERV legacy intact in that new proposal. So all of these issues are carried forward into the next generation of programs, and the budget is more than doubled. So this is, I think, excellent news for everyone around. Of course, if this also meets the test of reality in the final discussions between the Parliament and the Council. I also just want to maybe finish off by saying we are not just there to fund the programs, as important as that may be, but we are also there to be this bridge between the stakeholders, so the projects and the policymakers. So this bridging role is about developing this feedback to policy. So bringing the discussions, the experiences, the recommendations from different projects, structuring them, analyzing them, and feeding them back to colleagues such as Zuzana and higher in the Commission. And I can say that the interest among the policymakers for projects in the area of remembrance is growing. And that's why I'm also very pleased to be here today, so that we can all collectively see what we can innovate, what we can do better, what messages are out there for the policymakers, but also for us in the area of EU funds. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Srd, for your presentation, and especially for cheering youth and students to participate and to be engaged in remembrance. Now, Ulad, please, it's your turn.
Do you hear me now? Yeah, all right. And thank you also for this invitation. I think we had a bit of a gap in cooperation with EUROM due to the COVID, and I'm super happy to be in this wonderful chair. I really missed it. It feels so comfy in this obviously very beautiful aula in Universitat de Barcelona. Well, my presentation today will get a little bit away from this traditional template that we all know regarding how we shaped European memory. Well, technically in the 50s, out of the idea that let's trade, let's do the market, and let's do less worse with the steel and coal community, EUROM, and then afterwards that something that grew up into the internal market. And largely in the 70s, we pretended that, oh, but there were also fundamental rights, there was dignitas, Würde, dignity, there were the individual freedoms, and most importantly, there was the Holocaust memory. But the Holocaust memory in itself is something that appears on the avant-scene of European memory politics surprisingly late in the 70s, and in terms of judicialization, legal policies, even in the 80s. But we kind of know this linear story. We know that in Maastricht we created values and citizenship, and in order to give it a flash, kind of the memory policies followed it, and for many years in the 90s, 2000, there was a consensus that the Holocaust is central there. So 27 member states, very different from Finland to Malta, yeah, but let's agree on something in common. Unfortunately, all of those countries in different periods either tortured Jews, put them into Venetian ghettos, or excluded them as, la Rey de la España, de la Castilla, Aragon, as we know with the story of Sephardic Jews as the minimum, like, okay. But we are agreeing that until Holocaust there was something terrible in the identity politics of Europe, and therefore the Jewish history never again, nunca más, ni wieder, was so central to this narrative. Now, my presentation will start with 2022, with the Russia invading Ukraine and the ongoing Russo-Ukrainian war, and how it has changed this identitarian politics, or globally memory politics, identity politics, and how it also constitutionalized, of following Professor Minko, judicialisation de l'histoire. So in this case, how we constitutionalizing history more and more in the member states, very aggressively, I would say, for all good and bad reasons in Central and Eastern Europe, less so in Western Europe, also adding the touch of the colonial history. But yet what I have been observing in the past 10 years is the rise of a phenomenon that is wider than les reyes de la memoria, loi mémorielle, memory laws, which I would define as mnemonic constitutionalism. So let me start with the terminology and why that terminology is particularly important during this ongoing Russo-Ukrainian war as some tool to possibly better also explain the recent European EU largely policies. Well, by constitutionalism, in a very simplified form, we understand the ways we restrict our politicians, our societies with all sorts of checks and balances. There is the Constitutional Court or some kind of tribunal that restricts the governments, there is the parliament that legislates, there is the executive board that implements it, and that also brings a certain ontological security to societies, right? In a sense, we know where we stem from, where we are building our legacies upon, but something is kind of almost intuitively missing there in terms of identity. Is it just about restricting the societies? And I would say that mnemonic constitutionalism is a phenomenon that, of course, existed before the recent years, probably with the invention of the constitutional law itself, places also the policy in certain checks and balances and restrictions. But those checks and balances are explained by historical links, by historical narratives. So we're explaining how we are adjudicating, how we are managing our policies, societies, citizenships today, and how we're projecting them to the future, this kind of aspirational constitutionalism, with above respect to the past, for all the good and bad reasons. So usually it's created very linear, very simplistically. We are all, all of our ancestors were heroes, but of course victims, and all of our neighbors were absolutely terrible to us, yeah? And Sometimes we find that in constitutions directly. Sometimes we find that, I mean, almost in the grotesque form, if we take the Fidesz Constitution of 2010, in Hungary, very picturesque preamble, several articles, which with the medieval history of Hungary being a Christian state defending Europe against whatever evil was attacking it. Moreover, even kind of endowing ritualistic meaning to the crown of Saint Stephen, you know, bringing it more to kind of this mnemonic constitutionalism of Japan with its imperial eras here, but essentially these rituals are not not exactly only about the preambles, because intuitively we would find those preambles when there is a constitutional rupture. A new constitutional text after the times of totalitarianism or transition from colonial society to post-colonial society, and then the need to justify this ontological security. But very often we do not even change the constitution in order to produce mnemonic constitutionalism. In fact, you cannot even have the constitution and still have a very strong mnemonic constitutionalism, as the case of Israel postulates. This is the society that exists since the 40s, 50s without the formal basic law, yet in the absence of the basic law, the law of return is the principal constitutional act that postulates the possibility of returning of the Jews from all over the world to the historical motherland of the Zion, right? So the idea that history would explain this whole polity and stabilization. In fact, it's not surprising when that was very much illustrated also in the policies of the Commission, and such referred to how citizenship is always central, central and linked to the building of memory politics. For long since the 2000s, we've been constructing on the level of the EU organizations memory politics through citizenship, Europe through citizenship projects, right? Very often they are, of course, concentrated on the Holocaust or more generally on the memory of the Jewish heritage. But in a more simplistic way, the way we distribute citizenship, if you think about this with Germany, permitting to give to reinstate the citizenship for those Jews who were removed from German citizenship by the Nazi regime. Austria following the same examples, and here in Spain since 2007, La Ley de la Memoria followed, accompanied by the citizenship laws, no such other de menos, this famous phrase by the king, and granting of the citizenship to the Sephardi defendants, now probably less so. And in a way, it's been always complicated. There were still naturalization requirements. A similar law has been executed in a much more simplified procedure in the neighboring Portugal. But we do see that citizenship is also a kind of a bridge to this mnemonic constitutionalism, because where would we even teach citizenship? Usually during the constitutional law classes. And in the societies that do not have a very texts that are very aggressively populated with mnemonical references in terms of their constitutionals and basic laws, usually we do still find, to a varying degree, stronger or weaker mnemonic constitutionalisms on the level of citizenship. Well, Russia does it way more blatantly. Preceding the war in 2020 with the amendments to the Russian constitution, whose main purpose, of course, was just to explain why Putin can remain in power, elected for as many times as he wished. There were lots of facade changes, and one of those facade changes was also this memory of the heroic victimhood and during the Great Patriotic War and the fight for the fatherland, again, populating the constitution in a little bit of a Hungarian way, but less with medieval attributes and more with the classic Soviet trope template that Russians know very well. You can explain whatever presence with the attribution of World War II, which of course will conveniently be chronologically put from 1941 until 1945, avoiding the very inconvenient year of 1939. and referred as the reference as Great Patriotic War. Well, this way was also simulacred in the neighboring Belarus after actually already after the invasion of Ukraine that happened through the territory of Belarus in 2022, actually a few weeks after the invasion, with the new referendum in Belarus making practically a very similar right to truth imposition in the constitution and reference to the Great Patriotic War. What we see in Ukraine is expectedly the politics. If you have these words, you have the shields in terms of this contestation in international relations of the memory policies. We see the very much contested and criticized by practically all of my colleagues back in 2025 decommunization laws of Ukraine. Although technically speaking, in this plethora of 4 laws, only one was punitive. Most of them were very symbolic. And yet that was already sufficient to say that, the Venice Commission, leading scholars of memory studies were like, that raises the suspicions, the way the Ukrainians are constructing their decommunization. Well, after 2022, nobody talks about that, because something, changes radically. We see Putin, I'm sorry for this game of words, putting on the table only 2 reasons very actively for the invasion of Ukraine. One is this invisible NATO on the borders of Ukraine. It's still not clear why Estonia can be in NATO on the borders of Russia and Ukraine cannot. But the major justification, and Putin is very passionate about this, is lecturing its own population, but also the West, essentially through those facade staged of interviews that we've seen in the past years, in explaining that Ukrainians didn't exist. It's all the part of the triangular Russian Orthodox nation, so to say, where there are great, small, and white Russians, and therefore we are doing not much. We are just collecting the lands and fighting the Nazis. So what Putin is taking is essentially this very the trope that is known to every European, West European or Central and Eastern European about Nazism, this heroic past, this tragic past, the Holocaust, etc., and accusing your ontological enemy as being, this is a bit of Alice in Wonderland, when Alice gets into this hole and then everything is kind of reversed and you can say whatever you wish. So you can actually do almost semi-genocidal violence in Bucha and Mariupol and Irpin, but you would accuse precisely your counterpart in doing exactly that. You would say that they are the perpetrators, they are the fascists, the terminology that is very actively used by the Putin's regime. Now, what's interesting, and that's where we're getting back to the European Parliament and the European Commission. The memory of Central and Eastern Europe has always been slightly an uncomfortable child, I would say, after 2007, 2008 enlargements. There was always like this very uncomfortable moment should the sufferings of the people during the Stalinism, the gulags, the atrocities committed in Central and Eastern Europe in the satellite countries be on par with the genocidal violence towards the Jews in terms of Holocaust, parayomas of Roma, and we extended and extended. This comparability been always like, let's give something. It's been always like a bit of resolutions, not very strong one, not very precise. Like there was a resolution about Holodomor, the politics of mass starvation in Ukraine in the 30s in the European Parliament, even before the fully fledged Russian invasion in Ukraine in 2002. But it was hesitating to call it genocide, right? What's happening in the period between 2022 and 2023 is the rise of the resolutions on Ukraine. 27 resolutions are adopted by the European Parliament on Ukraine in different contexts. And there is a very clear message if you read through them, first very cautiously, in giving also above respect to Russians themselves as being victims of the communist sufferings, but essentially more and more adopting also what would seem to be Ukrainian narrative back in 2014, 2015, in acknowledging the Holodomor as the genocide and kind of resisting the Putin's attempt to prescribe European policies in a certain way. Well, recently, together with colleagues Angelika Newsberger, Angelika Glishinska-Grabias, and Maria Malkso, we edited a book about the politics of memory loss, you know, this judicialisation de l'histoire, not only in Central and Eastern Europe, although mostly it's about Russia, Ukraine, and neighboring countries, but also with the chapters on the Council of Europe, on the European Union. And one thing that we see clearly, and that's where I'm getting to my conclusions, is that something is changing in the European memory politics. Yes, it is still very much about identity, about finding that way, if it's not about only internal market, what that is. What's exactly in common between Finland and Cyprus, right? But it's also very much about finding this ontological security. So it's about peace and security as added elements to the construction of citizenship and identity. And this is about counteracting, you know, the Russian, you know, narratives about World War II. But I would even say, would make a step forward and would say that it's also about the rise of what can be framed probably as some sort of mnemonic constructivism in international relations. It's about finding alliances. If you look about Russia, it's not that isolated as it looks to be. I mean, from the obvious satellite of Lukashenko's regime for 25 years, there is China, and the parade we observed in Beijing just recently, and China very aggressively adopting Les Lois Mémorielles, you know, with this heroes and martyrs of the, also referring basically to World War II. So now it's not even clear who won the war, because in the Russian narrative it's always of course, the Soviets, the reduced version of Russians, and now we have the China. So, and this awkward alliance of bedfellows of Putin, Lukashenko, China, North Korea, you know, parading and finding alliance in a certain interpretation of histories, victimhood, heroism, also is reflected in building alliances widely, you know, in the European Union. That alliance is, of course, much more fragile because it's 27 member states who, to a varying degree, you know, constructing their, what Germans would call Staatsräson, also probably part of this, you know, mnemonic constructivism or mnemonic constitutionalism. And we have sub-alliances, let's say, Poland and Ukraine, despite disagreements on Volyn, still constructing their memory policies through the Institutes of National Remembrance, so institutionalizing them, trying to negotiate their memories through those institutions, bringing their, despite the Fidesz government, still, you know, some sectors of the even very right-wing Hungarian politicians, Slovaks, Czechs, being in a sub-alliance, let's say, on memory in a certain vision of the place of Central and Eastern Europe and in that paradigm. So to make it a long story short, we are moving, I would say, from the epoch of memory politics in the European Union as being a major resource of identity, of citizenship without duties, because as we open Article 21 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, we will know that we have many rights, but apparently we don't have duties, you know. So with this duty of memory probably being this, you know, mnemonic constitutionalizing factor underlying the raison d'etre of the European Union, of the European citizenship. But we are now moving more and more also into the cluster of European security, memory politics as a resource of ontological security in the time of war. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Vlad, for your enlightening presentation and for giving us this pan-European or even global point of view. We'll have some minutes for questions. I see one question on the last row and one here, so we can proceed. The mic, please. 3 questions. Microphone. We have the mics here. Sorry, Dad.
Hello, I'm Vesna Teršelić from Croatia, from Documenta, and wanted to ask a question about another challenge, as the title was New Challenges. And it's related to promotion of anti-fascism and human rights as realities of political radicalization in our countries are more and more often in analysis bringing even saying that there is a support for fascism, but if we can doubt that, in our societies, in Croatia this summer we had a concert of Thompson on which more than 500,000 people actually joined the singer in for Homeland Ready greeting, which is same as Nazi salute. So this is something what we live with and struggle with, and are currently bringing initiative for Croatia of freedom, together with filmmakers, writers, journalists, because there is a large pressure on accepting the legacy of fascism, really. And I wonder how much space there is to promote anti-fascism and human rights as European values, because we don't hear that very often. And I would say in post-Yugoslav countries, but also here in Catalonia and Spain, where actually we heard in previous panel, democracy came through anti-fascist fighters for democracy. We need it. We need it in our toolbox, let's say it. We need to speak more about anti-fascism. So it's not just from the past, it is not only related to the past, but we need it now so that we can actually have a decent memory politics nowadays and in the future also.
Anyone takes the question for comments or?
Maybe I can start, but I'm sure colleagues will then complement. I think on the promotion of fascism is, of course, a serious issue across Europe. So Croatia is only one of the examples, maybe one of the hardest examples. But there are laws. There is, so on the legal side, there is certain forms of manifestation and promotion of fascism can actually amount to a criminal offense. And there is a EU framework decision on countering racist speech that actually covers this to a certain extent. This has been transposed into member states, including in Croatia. So, some forms of those manifestations could be persecuted, but of course, then there is a discussion on how the police, how the responsible bodies are actually doing their job, and whether those particular facts amount to these crimes. But it is of course a serious issue, and in terms of priorities, as we have also discussed the priorities, this has been, it's somehow included in this memory of Holocaust, so projects can be done, but here we are not on the level of projects, but really serious follow-up of even criminal acts, yeah? But there are very small nuances that the cases have to be, of course, assessed on the individual basis, and there are a lot of politicians, a lot of manifestators, a lot of radicals being persecuted across the member states. So it's a lot about the functioning of the system, unfortunately. So, but maybe.
Well, from the perspective of the program activities, of course, as I said earlier, that in the remembrance call, for example, that address the victims of different totalitarian regimes from the past, that is already there. We also have a whole strand on citizen participation engagement, which is also for any other kind of joint activities by citizens, including debates on the political choices ahead of the society in Europe, etc. So I think from purely the funding arm, these kind of activities are covered and they are available there. I see no obstacles in proposing projects that would, of course, address and deal with the issue of rising fascist sentiment or something like that.
I actually think my colleagues covered the topic wonderfully, including the 2008 Council decision on xenophobic speech. So, yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
We have one more question here, Marta. No? Oh, sorry.
Shall I? Thank you, the three of you, very much for your interventions. I have two questions. One is that, if I understood well, the proposal by the Commission is to double the budget for these programs that you were mentioning from both DGs. But how, I mean, this sounds great, of course, but a bit contradictory with the rise of the radical right in Europe. And I wanted to know how optimistic what we should be about that proposal being approved or not. And the second question is about the asymmetry or the different memories in the East and West, because the one of the West is so much focused on the Holocaust, and Spanish history is not related to the Holocaust like it is in the rest of Western Europe. To what extent Spanish representatives align with that memory of the West, or if there is a third memory, which is the Spanish memory? Thank you.
Okay, so I can reply on the programs. Yeah, indeed, the situation, the current context and the experience so far with the programs and with the need was one of the main arguments to propose this this doubling of the budget. But as you are saying, it is, and as also was already mentioned, the discussions in the council we can end up with a different figure. In the past, we actually have even topping the budgets of the previous Daphne program or value strand in the past by the parliament. So maybe we can stay optimistic, but maybe not, because we have a different parliament this time. You may check the composition. So a lot of different forces will come into this discussion, and on the side of the council, it is always trying to reduce the budget. So my personal bet is that there would be a decrease, but it's my personal bet on knowing the situation. But if you are interested in this area, you know your MEPs, you can always lobby and try to explain the need for those programs, because there is a need, and what is the most important thing is actually to ensure that the money is well spent, there is a real impact on the ground, and basically the awareness activities, there are a lot of different projects, they actually reach the target groups, and they may make some difference. So this is, of course, joint work, collaboration of a lot of people who are working in terms of defining the priorities, implementing the projects, but then ultimately it's on the stakeholders, on the beneficiaries who are implementing those projects to ensure that there is a really good quality and impact is on the ground. And I can only share very briefly, but I think maybe even our Spanish colleagues can reply to this question, because how to bring basically the experience of Spain to the East and the Holocaust experience to here. I think this is precisely, in my opinion, what colleagues here are doing with organizing this network for a long time, to bring this discussion on the ground and somehow to reaching a lot of young people, and you all will come a bit impacted, even if you don't want. you will bring some new knowledge, and so I think this is all the projects are one of the tools. But also, the compilation of studies, the books that are being supported also by different programs bring and address this issue as well. But it is also important to pass the knowledge of the books then to people, and that's also the role of academics and universities. So yeah, it's hard. I would say it's not easy, but there are attempts, and any idea, any suggestion, even the discussions would definitely be very welcome. But then,
since we are running out of time, maybe the last question here.
Actually, I will be very brief. Thank you ever so much for all your contributions. Actually, my question is to, sorry, I cannot pronounce your... Right. Okay. You were saying about this changing in memory politics, right? And you were talking about this idea of peace and security, and of course about identity. I have a question related to this. It's just an open question. How religion makes here an element to think about? Mainly because you said before about, you know, the new memories of minorities, which in some terms religion is not an old identity, but if you think there is a place on that in all these new serves or whatever you will have it in, because I could not see it. Just that.
All right, very briefly, at least with one example about the religion in Europe. That's again returning to the Hungarian constitution. So this idea very strongly from the preamble that the nation is postulated ontologically as being Christian, as ontologically being resisting to the, you know, the terrible invaders from all the sides, and then this attribution of the Saint Stephen crowns and this you know, this whole religious personalia in Hungary. And I'm sure if I will dig a little bit into the memory, I will find more examples. In Russia, despite Dugin's and despite you know, strange symbiosis between Bolshevism and the Orthodox Church in the past years, in the new version of the constitution, there are references, but very mild, I would say. They still pretend to be you know, fairly secular state. But in that respect, and I will use it as the opportunity to respond to one question about the Spain that I find fascinating. Actually, Spain, for somebody who's been studying memory loss, of course, is one of the central country studies, and in many respects it indeed does sound a bit parochial. If you look into the template, and you will feel like, where do we feel with this Francoism? It's like, where, okay, those Eastern Europeans complaining about Stalinism, but you know, nobody hears about, let's say, the traumas of the Francoism, and this is another unheard theme. And then, at best, it's kind of trying to mimic, you know, let's take the French memory loss, always in the periods of, I would dare even to say, extreme left governments in 2007, and now with the current government, it's a matter of political taste. And, you know, linking then during 2014-15, you know, let's bring Sephardi Jews. In 2022, La Ley de la Memoria Democrática actually permits reinstatement of citizenship for the Francoist victims who were removed from that. And from that perspective, it's always like seeking its way, seeking how to speak the European language, the EU language, how to embed ourselves in the memory of the Holocaust or of the memory of the World War II, Nazism, fascism, in all of this discourse, and it might sound a little bit like, you know, poor relatives. But actually, if you look into the dynamics and spread and migration of memory loss, Spain looks as the major symbolic importeur or exporteur, you know, of memory loss, with Mexico and Argentina basically mimicking this amnesia type of memory loss without punitive measures, and employing on the city level of the La Ciudad de Mexico, La Ley de la Memoria Histórica, a similar law existing also since several years, since several years in Argentina. In this respect, you know, Spain becomes all of a sudden quite an important player. And not only for the reason that it also replicates, actually I can't but not cite Pierre Nora here, Le sport législatif purement français, the purely French legislative sport of the 2000s, you know, adopting memory loss as on the industrial basis, also now on the autonomous level, and postulating identity through this. But this is also creating a certain sample that can be borrowed elsewhere. I guess I will limit my freedom of speech here. Thank you.
Well, one more question, just because it's you, Jordi, and then.
I mean, this is. We tried with in the European context to, and you know Oriol better than me. We were to Europe to explain that there was no more than 10,000 Spanish people killed on the Nazi camps on the 2006 and 2007 with a project that it was no approved. And then we explained and we did a kind of lecture to the European Commission I mean officers there, because they invite after this project was not approved, and we illuminate, I mean, most of the historians know and everybody knows, but this is the you know, the lack in between history and social acknowledgement sometimes. And at the same time, it was I mean, they try, the former Spanish government, to put on the same packet of the European Parliament resolution or text condemning all the totalitarian regime and fascist regime and dictatorships, and they approve most of, but not the Spanish one. So it is still a kind of a demand or a fact, and to put always not our national local history, but also the contribution in international relations in between, you know, our history and our memory politics in this relation in Europe. And maybe this feedback could be with the idea from the friend, I don't know where you, from the comment, I guess, no? On this, no, that they put a level that, no, to be aware of this rising of the fascist demonstration, the fascist, not only in the far right votings, and inside, this is a question also not only for you, but we were dealing 2 days ago and yesterday in Madrid and in Portbou, that the general director, he left, that no, we are not going to create an area of international European relations inside the memory institutions in Spain. Why not? I mean, we should collaborate more than ever. And we are our basis with EUROM, but we are not talking about EUROM. I'm talking about the real institutions. And of course, you should collaborate with foreign affairs that you are doing now with this program. But here, the institutions, they say, no, we don't have money, we don't have, and it's one of the most important things to share these interchanges, just to talk about this Spanish case or labyrinth.
Well, thank you. No, just following your reflection, just mention that it is true that sometimes we tend to be pessimistic in terms of the results of remembrance and memory policies on the society. But on the contrary, as you said, Jordi, since 10 years ago, we saw a clear evolution of the EU memory policies promoted by the EU institutions. And then with the laws, with the national laws, that is enlarging this scope. I mean, first it was just Holocaust, then Holocaust and Stalinism, and then we finally could talk about other troubles, let's say, to make it easy, troubles in Europe, and now precisely the memories of migration and colonialism. So, at the end of the day, I must say with a small mouth that maybe we should be more optimistic. But it depends on all our work, it depends on the institutions that I celebrate this evolution of the institutional policies, personally. And well, thank you to the three speakers. Thank you to the audience for your enlightening questions. And 2 practical tips. The ones who are staying, now we have the lunch, and then the second, the next session will be downstairs on the ground floor, Aula Capella. It's an old chapel of the university. And the ones staying tomorrow still with us, we will be back here again. Okay, so thank you, and enjoy the lunch.